So given there's a number of new people listening tonight that are here, just to say that tonight's talk is a little different than what we normally do, because it's going to be directly focused on how we speak with each other in the world. And I find that spiritual practice is often compartmentalized. And we think of spiritual practice as when we're on our meditation cushions or at a class or on the top of a mountain in reverie or whatever, but these special circumstances. And yet, huge swaths of our day are in what we might call very ordinary mode of at work, talking with colleagues, with our children, our partner, talking and negotiating life circumstances or doing errands or whatever. And unless we can find a way to bring a wakeful quality of heart and mind and infuse it into what we think of as the ordinary moments, most of our life is that big in-between zone that it ends up being vacant. And there's not a integration or maturity to our waking up. So we'll explore those moments when we're speaking with each other tonight. And I could spend a year on this, and we could just keep on exploring it. And I'll say to start that if you did nothing else for a long time, but bring a real dedicated attention to how you speak with other people, you'd find it profoundly liberating, really freeing. There's a story of a big, tough samurai who goes to see a monk, and he says in a voice accustomed to obedience, instant obedience, he said, "Monk, teach me about heaven and hell," you know. And the monk looked at this mighty warrior and replied with utter disdain, "Teach you about heaven and hell?" He says, "I couldn't teach you about anything. You're dirty, and you smell, and your blade is rusty. You're a disgrace and an embarrassment to the samurai class. Get out of my sight. I can't stand you." And so the samurai is furious, and he's shaking and getting all red in the face and speechless with rage. So he pulls out his sword and raises it above him, preparing to slay the monk. "That's hell," the monk says softly. The samurai is overwhelmed with the compassion and surrender of this little man who's offered his life to give him this teaching. He's almost given himself for that. And he's so overwhelmed that he puts his sword down, he's filled with gratitude, and he's suddenly peaceful. "And that's heaven," the monk said softly. How we relate to each other can either bring an experience of heaven, of freedom, of this loving that's not being held back, that's flowing, of creativity, of beauty, of mystery, of adventure. It can be heaven. Or it can be a contraction where we're stuck inside a very small sense of self. And it's usually a sense of self that feels insecure and ashamed and not really good about itself, even when we're at our most arrogant. That's hell. So how do we wake up and begin to really be with each other in a way that is expressing presence? Really expressing presence, not being automatic, not being reactive. So one thing to name is that wise speech, which is our topic for the evening, mindful speech, is considered to be one of the Eightfold Path. It's clustered with working mindfully, mindful work, and mindful action. And this cluster of being in the world is guided by this basic understanding that our freedom, an expression of spirit, is reverence for life. So mindful speech comes out of reverence for life. a deep respect, a deep love for life. And I can say for myself that I've had many rounds of recognizing that I was in some habit pattern of unmindful speaking. And we're going to go over some of the main categories of unmindful speaking so that we can be more alert to it. But I'd recognize it and really get the dukkha, which is the word for suffering, how much it was creating separation, how much it was keeping me inside a mind state that wasn't pleasant. And so I've had many rounds of seeing that and rededicating to really focusing my attention on training in mindful speaking and speaking from the heart and speaking from an embodied place. And I forget all the time. It's so easy to go into a trance when we're with each other. But I find that each time I dedicate myself, there's some deepening in my remembrance about it. So my hope for you tonight is that as we go through these areas of where we really go into trance with each other and get reactive, that you'll flag what's relevant to you. And that, as I've experienced, you'll deepen the attention in a way that really opens up life. Then when we're on the road, so to speak, when we're out in the field with other people, it becomes a really interesting journey because we know that each conversation is an opportunity, each one, to remember that reverence and to speak from the whole of who we are. So the basic guidelines that the Buddha offered us in wise speech or mindful speech are very simple. He said, speak what is true and speak what is helpful. And make sure that both are there, that it's true and helpful. And so on the surface, this is very straightforward and clean and simple and beautiful. And it's really, really challenging. It's really challenging because often what we feel is truthful to say doesn't seem so helpful how we're doing it. And sometimes what might seem helpful doesn't feel so on the mark true. So it's an inquiry. Now, the domains that the Buddha described that include wise speech are to abstain from false speech, which means what's untrue, which includes lies, but it also includes white lies, and it includes exaggeration. Okay, so that's one of the three that I'm going to talk about tonight. And then he said to abstain from slander, which includes ways that we might condemn people, often behind their back, but it also includes gossip. Okay? So I'm kind of giving you the range a little bit. And the third thing was avoid harsh speech, which could be anything from directly aggressive blasting somebody to a more passive aggressive, a little bit of guilt induction or whatever. Okay, so these are our domains. And so we're going to look at how even the subtle versions of these, just some white lies or some gossip or however we indirectly say things, can really trap us in a spiritual way, trap us from and keep us from discovering and living from who we can be. So we'll take them one by one, and when we begin with false speech, untrue speech, this is pretending, exaggerating, lying, and so on. If you look in Amazon for books on deception, there's a huge number of them. It's an increasing number in the field about what makes us lie, how come we do it, and how frequently we do it. Some of these might sound familiar as just the most popular white lies. It wasn't me, or gee, you haven't changed a bit. The check is in the mail. I never got the message. She's only a friend. Oh, your baby looks so beautiful. And that looks really good on you. I'm starting my diet on Monday. thank you, dinner was so delicious. And this is called a dude lie. My best friend's a good guy. He's just finding his way. Translation, he's an alcoholic and a womanizer who can't hold down a job, but I've known him since we were 12, so I can't say anything. So these are from the internet, and we know them. We know how often it is that we exaggerate or say things that aren't exactly what we really mean. It's a habit, and there's a consequence. But the reason it is so pervasive, deception is so pervasive, is that it's one of the main tools in evolution for surviving, for getting what we need, and for gaining advantage. You know, camouflage, take camouflage. I'll give you a few more examples because I was just reading this week about a certain kind of hawk that they found in France, that the males have permanent female plumage, and they're not attacked as much, but from other males don't attack them so much, and they get all sorts of benefits. And then I was reading about these garter snakes, and they emit, when they come out of hibernation, they emit these feminine hormones. And what happens is that garter snakes form mating balls of about 100 males to a female. And when these snakes come out of hibernation and emit the feminine pheromones, all the males cluster around them and warm them up. And then once they're warm enough, because they come out really cold, then they stop emitting the pheromone and the guys leave and they go on. So it's the way they get a snake hug, you know? And I think it's kind of cool. Okay, in Brazil, the large cats, there's some large cat that mimics the cry of a baby monkey. And then when the other monkeys concerned come and try to find the baby, you know what happens, pounce, right? So there's that one. One more. Baby German cockroaches. It just seems so far-fetched. Anyway, of both sexes mimic the feel and smell of adult females, and it dupes the adult into spreading wings and exposing hidden pantries of food underneath. So again, it's just these pretenses that we do too. I mean, you know, humans have our whole range, and what they do is they give us certain kinds of gains, and they protect us. And so it's what I sometimes call a false refuge. It's very compelling, it's very effective, and it causes us trouble in the long run. So we can see it in our personal history will incline us towards more deception. You know, if we grew up in a family that was very punishing, you know, there was a real consequence to truth, then you can see the children that lie the most. You know, it's to protect them from getting in trouble for something. And we can see it for ourselves. I mean, I was noticing the other day, I was going to a doctor's appointment, and I had decided to get a few more things done before I left, and so I was late. And I watched my mind making up excuses about the traffic as I was going there, what I was going to say that wasn't true. And it's like I kept saying, you know, you're not going to say this. But then my mind would come up with another excuse that wasn't real, you know. And so our minds just do it. There's this kind of way that we want to protect ourselves from looking bad or getting in trouble. And then, of course, you know, it happens in relationships. And one of the most difficult ways, and I'll give you an example of this later, is lying about other relationships to a partner to avoid jealousy or more conflict or some sort of punitive behavior. Some of you might remember the story of this young man, John, who invites his mother to dinner, and during the meal, John's mother can't help but notice how beautiful John's roommate is. And so she's long been suspicious of a relationship between the two, and this only made her more curious. And watching them interact over the evening, she really wondered, there was more to this relationship than met the eye. So reading his mother's thoughts, the guy volunteers. He says, look, I know what you might be thinking, but I assure you that Carrie and I are just roommates. Okay. About a week later, Carrie came to John and said, you know, ever since your mother came here for dinner, I've been unable to find that beautiful silver soup ladle. You don't think she did something with it, do you? So he says, I doubt it, I'll email her just in case. So he writes, Dear Mother, I'm not saying you did or did not do anything with the soup ladle, but it's odd that it disappeared after the dinner. Do you know anything about this? Later, he received an email from his mother that read, Dear son, I'm not saying that you do sleep with Carrie, and I'm not saying that you don't, but the fact remains that if she was sleeping in her own bed, she would have found the soup ladle by now. So when we expect some sort of punishment, we shape events a certain way. And we will lie for personal gain. And again, this comes, we can see it in our history. If we did not get the attention we needed, if our needs were not met, then we'll use exaggeration and we'll misrepresent ourselves in order to get the attention and the approval that we are longing for. So you can see it. I mean, how many of us will exaggerate something positive, exaggerate an achievement or the kind of good feedback we got from someone? You know, the classic fish stories of how big was it? You know, we do that. We also pretend with each other to agree sometimes, we kind of mime each other in a way so that we can have more connection. So we sometimes withhold or misrepresent our beliefs or where we're at so that we can just be getting along and having good feelings with other people. So the suffering of this, you know, because sometimes little white lies might seem they're fine, and sometimes there's probably an intelligence to them. But the habit of misrepresenting, of withholding information, of not speaking truth, really in a deep way, it affects our soul. It affects the clarity and brightness of our being. There's been, I've described here a description of what one hospice worker found was really most important or most biggest regrets when people are dying. And one of them that struck me was this one. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings, to speak what was true for me. That there's this sense that if we were at the end of our life looking back, we would be really dedicated to not exaggerating or pretending or being other than who we are. Because there's a karma to it, and the karma is this, that in any moment that we misrepresent, we create distance. We can't be intimate if we're not being real. We create a distance where we're not able to really trust ourselves or the other person because, well, if they knew the truth, then something bad would happen. I'd get punished or something. So we can't trust the relationship because it's based on a false assumption. We're not speaking truth. And in a very deep way, and this is the thing I want to emphasize tonight, is that when we don't speak from a place of truth and clarity, our identity becomes small. We become identified with the self that has to defend and pretend. We reinforce a sense of a small self. I sometimes call this the spacesuit self that's trying to make it through life, but we get identified with the spacesuit that's pretending something. And it's very hard to remember and be at home with who we really are. We can't discover that. The more we are in the habit of exaggerating or misleading or misrepresenting, the more we actually do it in our own mind to ourselves. In other words, if we're lying to the world, we also misrepresent reality to ourselves. It's not like we're lying to the world, but we stay very clear with truth in ourselves. We have to deceive ourselves. So it's a false refuge. And one woman, this is an example for you, who lied about a relationship. When she was engaged with her husband-to-be, she continued a relationship with an old flame. And she lied about that to her husband. And he, even after they were married, was suspicious because the two still had a friendship and there was something he detected. And she had stopped the relationship, but she kept the lie. And then she had because he was suspicious and jealous, she felt resentful of him. And then she added lies upon lies. And it was poisonous. It was a real wedge in the relationship. And what happened was they could never address the original wound, the original mistrust, because she kept adding on layers, which is the problem. That when we take false refuge, when we use the defense and armor of lies, we can't actually name and touch and bring healing to the place inside us that's afraid, that needs support, that in some way is not at home with ourselves. So, in the deepest way, not speaking truth obscures our true nature. We are identified with the self who's exaggerating and can't really be in touch with who we are. Now, this is true in our individual relationships, and it's also true in the larger world, that if, as a society, we don't name what's true. Just the way she couldn't name the disease in her relationship, but if we don't name what's true, we don't have a shared understanding of what needs attention. So consider the disaster for our Earth. If we can't name the truth of global warming, if we can't name the truth of how much toxicity is in our air and our water and entering our bodies, and if we can't name the truth of all the animals that are struggling because of the way humans are treating this earth, we'll never address it. Or we'll, as we're doing now, address it in such a limp manner as to not in any way meet the tragedy that's befalling our precious planet. If we can't name the truth, it's disaster. Consider the suffering when we can't name the truth of the violence that happens to certain people in certain places and the social injustice that happens. If we don't name that it's really true and happening, if we turn a blind eye, what's the result? This is Martin Niemöller, who's a German pastor. He said, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me."